Good afternoon. Welcome back. This is Geography 130, Lecture 14. Today we're going to talk about gendercide, the overpopulation myth. Although we might do those in the other order. We might start with the overpopulation myth and then talk about gendercide. And then I'm going to talk about Matthew Connelly's book, Fatal Misconception, The Struggle to Control World Population. How many of you were able to get that first 45 pages read for today? I kind of wish I'd gone ahead and assigned the next chunk as well so that we could have done this all in one lecture, but so it goes. The first time you teach a book, you're prone to make, yes? Is this going to be posted on BSpace? Yes, these slides will be posted to BSpace. They were not posted beforehand because they did not exist yet. They were only summoned into being in the last 70 minutes or so. But I will post them to BSpace, yes. I also want to take a few minutes to talk about the paper. We have a handout that I probably should have gotten wrapped up today and distributed. We can post it to BSpace shortly, describing in more detail the paper and what we're expecting of you. I understand there have been some questions already about it, and we want to try to address those questions. I thought I would spend a few minutes now talking about it. Nathan, I don't know if you had further thoughts about the handout? No. Okay, and I'm working from memory here. Basically, we're interested in you doing some research related to the themes of the class, the material we've covered. At one point, we had it framed as look at the causes and consequences of an environmental issue or problem. However, we are actually thinking about, in a sense, broadening it, if that's not broad enough already, because we realize that there are themes in the class that may or may not be directly environmental, such as migration, for example. So patterns of population movement and growth might be addressed in their own right. So we are interested in you choosing a topic and relating it to the course. Have you got ideas for papers already in mind? How many of you have thought about this? What kinds of questions have you got for us about the paper? Anybody, whether you have an idea yet or not? All right, maybe I don't need to devote any time to this then. It's all perfectly clear. The end result, a 5 to 7 page paper, double spaced. It shouldn't be that daunting a challenge. Do you have questions about what kinds of things might or might not count as good topics? Yes. Economics. Okay. So the question, how are we going to make ecosystems valuable so that they are better protected or stewarded or managed? I would suggest that's an excellent topic. However, it's probably rather broad, right? So you're going to need to try to narrow it down. One of the ways I would suggest you do this is actually by doing some research, some sort of preliminary research, in which you use some of the search engines and databases available through the library to do a sort of preliminary run, right? So if you were to type, I could do this right now if you'd like. If you were to type ecosystem services into a search engine for, say, biosis, papers related to biology and ecology, you'd probably end up with, 8 or 10,000 papers, which would probably be more than you want to try to sort through, right? So at that point, you might want to begin to narrow it down by adding additional search terms, such as valuation, or governance, or pick a part of the world, or a kind of ecosystem, watersheds, or tropical rainforests, that kind of thing. And start to maybe pick an example or two where this is being worked on, and try to dig into the research and identify some key questions or some key issues. What are the obstacles to valuing ecosystem services? What kinds of measures have been tried? That kind of thing. Trying to integrate the biological or ecological information with some of the political economy questions that have come up throughout the course. Yeah? What about a watershed restoration project that's sort of local and looking at what had to be done to make it possible? I would worry that by itself, it might be difficult to relate to the themes of the course, right? There are countless examples of sort of community-based or local scale ecological restoration projects out there. How would you want to link those to some of the broader themes of the course? I'm open to suggestions. Well, on the other hand, ecological restoration is a growth industry. It's actually a multi-billion-dollar industry, mostly funded by government money, but nonetheless commanding enormous amounts of resources, and that's a fairly recent phenomenon, just in the last 20 or 30 years. And that might be something that you could relate quite directly to the themes of the course. How do you make sense of a basically government-funded, government-subsidized private sector market in restoration? This is triggered by a great many statutes, but runs through a world of nonprofit organizations, local community groups, state-level agencies that get their money through federal agencies, that sort of thing. It might be interesting to look at those. This actually relates quite directly to the ecosystem services issue, insofar as a lot of those agencies are actually trying to figure out ways to make market incentives part of the process of allocating resources for restoration. So those are good possibilities. Are there other things people would have in mind? Yes? Are you required to tie back to required readings in the class? I would say not in the sense that there have to be a bunch of citations and direct quotations from required readings, but in the more general sense of linking to one or more of the major themes, you're probably going to run into the required readings in some way or another. Again, we would like these papers to relate to the course. That makes sense, right? That's not an unreasonable expectation, I hope. Other thoughts or questions? Yeah? What format do I want for citations? That's a good question. I don't have a single format that I require. I actually don't care that much what format you use. What I care about is that you use it consistently and that it provides the necessary information. In other words, that it's consistent and comprehensive. If you prefer footnotes, if you prefer endnotes, if you prefer those formatting questions, you should ask your GSI. They might provide more specific details or guidance, but I myself don't have a single format that I require. Seems to me it ought to, in some ways. If you end up writing articles for journals, you end up using whatever format the journal wants, right? Other questions? Yeah. How do you scale down from an idea that might be quite large to a focus for your paper that's manageable in 5 to 7 pages? That is an excellent question. It's a major challenge of doing research, right? There's vastly more information out there than can possibly be treated in a lifetime, let alone in 5 to 7 pages, and you need to find ways of narrowing it. It can be done in a bunch of different ways. It can be done geographically by deciding that by picking a part of the world that strikes you as interesting for purposes of your paper, or because you're interested in it. You can do it topically by selecting, for instance, rainforests or watersheds or nutrient loading as a focus within which to look at something like ecosystem services. You can also let the literature itself kind of lead you towards a narrower focus. If you pick a topic and start looking at what are the debates right now, what are the active areas of research, what kinds of things are sort of prominent in the minds of scholars or practitioners as far as how to move forward or where to focus their energies. That's another way of starting to narrow it down. I mean, in many subfields, simply identifying the 2 or 3 papers or books that have been most influential is a good first step in narrowing your topic, if that's the way you wish to do so. Other questions? I'm sorry, yeah.
I have no question. I haven't decided on the subject matter yet. One other idea, that would be on the millennium assessment.
Yes.
Could you do a paper taking maybe the 4 scenarios and debunking them, or doing it in research on why it would not work?
The 4 scenarios?
The 4 millennium assessment scenarios on what they propose.
Trying to debunk them. Certainly. If that can be done in 5 to 7 pages, maybe take one of them. Or maybe try to zero in on one particular reason why one or more of those scenarios is unlikely to work. And again, this is intended to give you the freedom to define a topic that's interesting to you, to write a paper that is perhaps heavily weighted towards the conceptual or theoretical issues, hopefully not completely disconnected from empirical material, or on the other hand, a paper that draws more heavily on empirical examples out there and tries to work them back against the conceptual or theoretical points that we've discussed in the class. Somewhat along the lines of the midterm question. Sort of, can you take these 6 examples of demographic sort of moments and use them to push the major theories that we've looked at with regards to population and economics, that kind of thing. Does that dispel any concerns? You can go on spring break with an ease of mind now? Yeah. How many sources do you need? The expectation is that you would end up with at least sort of 8 to 10 sources, and that those would not be sources that are simply websites. That's something you should discuss with your GSI. There's certainly no requirement that you have more than that. You probably ought to have roughly at least that many. And again, you shouldn't include every single source you look at. You should include the ones that matter, right? The ones that are important to the purposes of your paper. Okay, so I want to start with this. Javier sent me this morning, an article from the most recent Prospect called The Overpopulation Myth by Fred Pierce. The idea that growing human numbers will destroy the planet is nonsense, but overconsumption will. And let me read some of this to you. He says, many of today's most respected thinkers, from Stephen Hawking to David Attenborough, argue that our efforts to fight climate change and other environmental perils will all fail unless we, quote, do something about population growth. In The Universe in a Nutshell, Hawking declares that in the last 200 years, population growth has become exponential. The world population doubles every 40 years. But this is nonsense. For a start, there is no exponential growth. In fact, population growth is slowing. For more than 3 decades now, the average number of babies being born to women in most of the world has been in decline. Globally, women today have half as many babies as their mothers did, mostly out of choice. They are doing it for their own good, the good of their families, and if it helps the planet too, then so much the better. And he goes on to detail some of these numbers. We've actually seen some of these numbers in the article from The Economist about falling fertility. He says, why is this happening? Demographers used to say that women only started having fewer children when they got educated and the economy got rich, as in Europe. But tell that to the women of Bangladesh, one of the world's poorest nations where girls are among the least educated in the world, and most marry in their mid-teens. They have just 3 children now, less than half the number their mothers had. India is even lower at 2.8. Tell that to the women of Brazil. In this hotbed of Catholicism, women have 2 children on average, and this is falling. Nothing the priests say can stop it. Women are doing this because for the first time in history they can. Better healthcare and sanitation mean that most babies now live to grow up. It is no longer necessary to have 5 or 6 children to ensure the next generation, so they don't. He describes places where there are still some holdouts, but he insists the big story here is that rich or poor, socialist or capitalist, Muslim or Catholic, secular or devout, with or without tough government birth control policies in place, most countries tell the same tale of a reproductive revolution. He goes on to admit that doesn't mean population growth has ceased, but he says within a generation the world's population will almost certainly be stable and very likely to be falling by mid-century. Is this good news for the environment and the planet's resources? He suggests no. Or rather, it's not where we should focus our attention. He says, in fact, rising consumption today far outstrips the rising head count as a threat to the planet. And most of the extra consumption has been in rich countries that have long since given up adding substantial numbers to their population, while most of the remaining population growth is in countries with a very small impact on the planet. By almost any measure you choose, a small proportion of the world's people take the majority of the world's resources and produce the majority of its pollution. So he talks about carbon dioxide emissions. He says that the world's richest 500 million people, about 7% of the population, are responsible for half the world's carbon dioxide emissions. Meanwhile, the poorest 50% of the population are responsible for just 7% of emissions. Virtually all of the extra 2 billion or so people expected on this planet in the coming 30 or 40 years will be in this poor half of the world. Stopping that, even if it were possible, would have only a minimal effect on global emissions or other threats. So he says, economists predict the world economy will grow by 400% by 2050. If this does happen, less than a tenth of that growth will be due to rising human numbers. Some of these poor people might become rich. He says, I hope they do, but their impact on the planet will therefore be greater. But it is the height of arrogance for us in the rich world to downplay the importance of our own environmental footprint, because future generations of poor people might one day have the temerity to get as rich and destructive as us. How dare we? So then he points out that Malthus was scorned and satirized in his own day. He talks about Charles Dickens, and this is kind of interesting. He says, when Oliver Twist asked for more gruel in the workhouse, that was a satire on a newly introduced Get Tough law on workhouses known popularly as Malthus's Law. In hard times, the headmaster obsessed with facts, Thomas Gradgrind, had a son called Malthus. Malthus, it should be remembered, spent many years teaching British colonial administrators before they went out to run the empire. They adopted his ideas that famine and disease were the result of overbreeding, so the victims should be allowed to die. It was Malthusian thinking that led to the huge and unnecessary death toll in the Irish potato famine. So he concludes we must not follow the lure of Malthus and blame the world's poor for the environmental damage caused overwhelmingly by us, the rich. The truth is that the population bomb is being defused around the world, but the consumption bomb is still primed and ever more dangerous. First of all, what do you think of that argument, of Pierce's argument? I see 1 thumbs up in the back row. Any other thoughts? 2 thumbs up from the second row. 2 more thumbs up from the second to last row. Is that the sum total of our thoughts on this? Okay. Moving on then. in a moment, I want to look at another piece from The Economist. But first, I want to ask, how does this, do you see any connections here between Pierce's argument and Connolly's argument about the struggle to control world population? Is there any kind of underlying similarity? What does Pierce have to have in order to be able to make this argument? Not a trick question. We might also ask why he uses, or why the editor chose to use this picture to illustrate his argument. Yeah.
The picture shows overconsumption more than it shows population.
Really? That looks like overconsumption to you? How about everyone else? Overconsumption would be a mansion in suburbia. All right. There's definitely some oil and some energy being consumed. There are a lot of people in a small space. It looks crowded. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so from my mind, I'm seeing overconsumption that look closer to people chasing Western hegemonic definition of success.
You see people chasing the Western hegemonic definition of the success. That's what does that look like? I mean, it looks to me like they might be chasing a bus, but they're not going to have any trouble catching it because the bus is so clogged in traffic, it's not moving. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Those are all vehicles of like that hold anywhere from 8 to like 40 people. And if this scene were to be expressed in Los Angeles, it would take like X amount of miles of freeway.
All right. At least the average vehicle in the picture appears to hold many people, which would suggest higher per vehicle human freight, so to speak. Greater efficiencies, hopefully. Yes, in the back row. Okay, it depicts great congestion in an urban area, which could be, from our vantage point, I mean, the reason it looks perhaps like a picture or conjures notions of overpopulation might actually speak to the phenomenon of urbanization attracting large numbers of people from rural areas, creating these congested areas, but also thereby creating the mind's eye picture of overpopulation as a problem. Surplus population, that kind of thing. Yeah. Is Pierce's argument that we are afraid of the growing affluence of poorer parts of the world? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So we could construe this as an argument that going green in the U.S. is kind of a trivial matter in the big picture of global resource use, given the growth in areas like China and the consumption that will follow from it. I'm not sure Pierce is going quite so far as to say we're afraid, but it is clear that he is chastising environmentalists, or those environmentalists who would make the argument that somehow population has to be controlled. And that's where the tie to Connolly, I think, is an interesting one. And we'll see this again with The Economist. In many ways, Connolly is not just talking about a particular movement. He's talking about the underlying frames of reference necessary to make such a movement possible, right? He's talking about thinking about population at the kinds of scales that mattered for the purposes of this history, thinking about population at the scale of the planet and also at the scale of nation states. But he's specifically pointing out that the impulse to try to control world population is a reflection of, or a function of, a growing sense of lack of control, particularly for the nation state itself. And here, I guess, the common thing I'm thinking about is even Pierce would not be able to make this argument without relying on this frame of reference itself. In other words, the numbers, the data at national scales and global scales, relating, detailing population numbers, fertility rates, mortality rates, life expectancies, projecting out what's going to happen, being able to say with some authority that population growth is declining and will in fact cease at some point in the not too distant future. And therefore, we don't need to be worried about it, or rather, it's not where we should start our inquiry into addressing environmental problems. Yes?
I guess adding to this type of data, you would also need something that measures consumption and compare it to the growth of nations.
So you would also need numbers about consumption, and he's got them, right? He's got the carbon emissions numbers, for example. This actually did flare up during Copenhagen. In the weeks leading up to it and during it, there was a sort of flurry of articles in which people said, "Wait a minute, why isn't there more talk about population? What's been overlooked here?" And sort of reasserting the importance of population for any meaningful attempt to control emissions. Okay, let's go back then to this. Did anybody see this when it came out? It's just a couple weeks ago, March 4th. This was the cover story in The Economist. Killed, aborted, or neglected. At least 100 million girls have disappeared, and the number is rising. Imagine you are one half of a young couple expecting your first child in a fast-growing poor country. You are part of the new middle class. Your income is rising. You want a small family. But traditional mores hold sway around you, most important in the preference for sons over daughters. Perhaps hard physical labor is still needed for the family to make its living. Perhaps only sons may inherit land. Perhaps a daughter is deemed to join another family on marriage, and you want someone to care for you when you are old. Perhaps she needs a dowry. Now imagine that you have an ultrasound scan. It costs $12, but you can afford that. The scan says the unborn child is a girl. You yourself would prefer a boy. The rest of your family clamors for one. You would never dream of killing a baby daughter, as they do out in the villages. But an abortion seems different. What do you